maybe even a genius. That's how President Trump is defending himself this morning as he unleashes on his critics.
Just minutes ago, the president sent out a trinity of tweets, let's say, attempting to reshape the narrative after the scathing tell-all about his administration was released. Let's start with CNN's Abby Phillip, live in Washington. The president says that he is, like, really smart.
Right, a trinity of tweets. I really like that one, Victor. Well, let me just get right to the tweets. The president's been very busy on social media this morning. Starting out with the Russia collusion story, here's what he wrote. Now that Russia collusion, after 1 year of intense study, has proven to be a total hoax on the American public, the Democrats and their lapdogs in the fake news media, mainstream media, are taking out the old Ronald Reagan playbook and screaming mental stability and intelligence. Actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. Crooked Hillary Clinton also these cards very hard, and as everyone knows, went down in flames. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to President of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. So the president is really taking this head on and addressing some of the chatter that, frankly, predated this book by Michael Wolff, which delved pretty deeply into some of the president's habits, his reading or lack thereof, his repetition of words. But we also know that Democrats on the Hill have gotten a briefing from a psychologist on this very subject, and some of that is penetrating the West Wing. Now, the president is actually today in Camp David, which is just north of here in Washington, and he's supposed to be meeting with members of his cabinet and Republican congressional leaders. These meetings are intended to be all about the 2018 agenda and what they want to accomplish on policy, immigration, DACA, infrastructure, for example. But instead, we've heard quite a lot from the president about this book, this Michael Wolff book that has clearly gotten underneath his skin. The president is very angry about some of these revelations and has been tweeting since overnight about them and about his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, who was quoted repeatedly in the book, trashing the president and his family.
All right, Abby Phillip for us in Washington. Thanks so much.
With us now, Washington Bureau Chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, Lynn Sweet, CNN legal analyst Paul Callan, Republican New York City Councilman Joseph Borelli, and former White House ethics lawyer Richard Painter. Thank you all for being with us. We appreciate it. Councilman, would like to start with you. Councilman Borelli, your reaction to the tweets this morning.
Well, I think he's absolutely right. This is something that was used against President Reagan to try to undermine and discredit his presidency. And I'll stand with the president and say that this is false. As someone who has actually spent time around the conference table with Donald Trump over the past few years, I can say that not only is this false, but it is patently false, incorrect, and it's a shame that this is the tactic that some in the Democratic Party are using to undermine the president.
Is it necessary, Councilman, though, to talk about how smart you are, to talk about how genius, how stable your mentality is?
Well,
I mean, is that for him to say? Would it be better for somebody else to say it?
Well, I think it's not for someone like a psychiatrist hired by a Democratic politician who's never even met the president to say, certainly not that. But I think the president's taking the attacks head on, and that's his right to do so. And, as far as being a little bit of an exaggerator, that's not something the president is not known for, frankly.
Richard, your reaction.
Well, this tweet is indicative of the president's mentality. And not to say that a public corporation, if the chief executive officer was sending out tweets like this at this time in the morning, the board of directors would have him removed from office by noon. And yet we tolerate this type of erratic behavior from the President of the United States. Well, he's in control of nuclear weapons. And we have various lapdogs of the Republican Party going to defend him. I've been a Republican for 30 years. I used to be active in New York as a Republican, in Illinois, now in Minnesota. And this is exactly why the Republican Party is in trouble. If we are going to tolerate this type of immature conduct from the president. And I'd have to say that Ronald Reagan would be disgusted at the idea of people meeting with the Russians to collaborate and get dirt on their political opponent. He would be absolutely disgusted. And it's really shameful where we are now in our country.
Paul, is there an understanding, however, and let me play devil's advocate, that this book by Michael Wolff, there have been a lot of people, a lot of journalists who've come out and said there are things in this book that are factually untrue. Does the president not have a right to defend himself?
He certainly does have a right to defend himself, but it's unusual for a president to do so. There are going to be a lot of books written about Donald Trump during the course of this presidency. And by the way, he's an old hand at this. You know, there have been books written about him in the past, and he sued the authors of those books. So he should know that kind of the smartest thing is to just back off and let the story settle down. And you may want to take shots at the qualifications of the journalist as to whether he really did have the sources he claims to have had. And there's been some pushback out of the White House from a lot of people saying, hey, we never said that to Wolff. And I think it'd be much smarter doing that than saying, hey, I'm a really smart guy, and by the way, I'm not crazy. If I were a lawyer defending this case and I put a witness on the stand and the first two questions were, how smart are you and are you mentally stable? They'd take my law license away. So that's not a really good way to begin your defense.
Secretary Tillerson has come out in the last couple of days and said, look, there's no reason that he has ever had to question the president's mental stability. Jeff Flake from Arizona overnight said the same thing, that he doesn't think that there is a mental issue with the president. He just wants him to get on with the work that he does. I want to read to you, though, or if we do have the sound, producers, please let me know. Michael Wolff did an interview overnight with the BBC, and he talked about